Hello, and welcome to week number 2 of the very special Lines podcast here, where me and Brett go over all of our Circa contest picks. Of course, I am Matt Brown. Find me on Twitter at MattBrownM2. You can find Brett over on the Twitter machine at Brett Collson here. We are coming off of a 1-3-1 week, not really setting the world on fire here in this contest. Brett, we had a weird push with the Colts, which kind of sucked. We had what I thought to be a locked-in win with the Lions. They go into soft defense, allow the Cardinals to come back and tie that game, which of course loses our 2.5 in that one. I'm not going to say those were necessarily bad beats, but those were certainly unfortunate beats.
Yeah, we thought we were dead with the Colts at one point too, and then they scored a quick touchdown, and we're right in it. And look, I don't want to blame a kicker, but come on, Adam Vinatieri.
Yeah.
Come on, dude.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that one looked like, that one turned really quickly, and then we were like, oh man, this one seems like we actually have this one, and things were looking up for us here. I mean, I looked back over the process here, and honestly, I'm not really regretting too awfully much. I mean, look, we took the Bucs, and the Bucs lost. They played a horrible, terrible game, and then we see them come back on Thursday night and win a game. And
that was a weird game, man.
And, you know, the Bucs, it was a team where I think we were probably on the right side of that. If you look at how this game broke down, I mean, they gave the 49ers 2 defensive touchdowns. They had 8 penalties for over 80 yards in that one. They had 4 total turnovers. They had 3 bad drops in that one. I mean, every single thing went against. They had a touchdown called back. I mean, it was every single thing went against the Bucs in that game. And then then they come back and then they win this week against the Panthers. And so, you know, I'm not really regretting that decision too awfully much. I mean, when you look back on it, do you feel like we made a big error there, or do you think that's just kind of being on the bad side of variance?
No, I think the process was right there. They played great defensively. The 49ers had nothing going on offense the entire game. So, you know, the 2 defensive touchdowns was really what did Tampa Bay in. They had a chance to go in and tie it up there at the end of the fourth quarter, and Jameis did Jameis things, and we were done. The one that I think we obviously misread was the Broncos and Raiders.
Yeah, the Broncos are just way worse than I thought. I mean, like,
they're bad.
I mean, they are just way worse than I thought. And honestly, we learned a lot in that first game, which I am taking into consideration here because I fully believe a guy in his 60s isn't going to change his stripes. Like in the middle of seeing Vic Fangio coach certainly has me very wary of this Broncos team now too, because he is using that old school points are better than no point strategy here. I mean, a guy that chose to reduce a lead from 15 to 12 whenever there were 8.5 minutes left in the game. Yes, Brett, if you do that math, that is still 2 touchdowns that he needs with 8.5 minutes left in a game here. And if that's the way that he's going to coach this team, if that's the way that he's going to play, it's going to be real hard for me to get on the Broncos train really anytime soon, because that is just not the way you can play football in 2019.
There are guys in this league who are just better suited to be coordinators, X's and O's guys. I think Vic Fangio is one of those guys. I think Doug McDermott in Buffalo is another one of those guys. Or Sean McDermott. I always do that. But yeah, I mean, you can't. It's so hard to put trust in a guy who makes decisions like that, because they're I mean, in a game where the edges are so small, you have to be right in every single one of those situational. I mean, the situational play calling and the kicking a field goal or going for it. I mean, those are huge in the NFL, and so many of these guys just do it the opposite the way they should.
This should certainly be a fun podcast to talk through if you guys are wanting to go through our processes here, because there are a lot of differences in our cards this week. I'll just start with the one game that we are both on here, and that is Jags +8 at the Texans. So we are both on that one. So that one is definitely going to make the card. I think my biggest thing in this game was the look ahead line here was 3.5. And I understand that Nick Foles is out for this game, but are you really and truly going to try and tell me that Nick Foles is worth 5 points, Brett? It just, to me, does not seem like that is the case whatsoever. So for me, it was kind of just nearly a cut and dry decision when I look at it, because I don't think certainly Gardner Minshew, we don't really know what he's all about. When he stepped in, he looked good when he was under center, but is he that big of a drop off from Nick Foles? It's hard for me to buy it. And then after watching what this Texans defense, and I use defense in air quotes here, did against this Saints team, I think the Texans, I think the Jaguars are going to be able to move the ball here. So I don't know. It just seemed like this line was a really, really big overreaction to what is really a middling quarterback going down for a team.
Yeah, agree. And look, Minshew looked phenomenal. It's a small sample, but he was 22 for 25. He just marched down the field against the Chiefs, which is not a difficult thing to do, but he looked like a pro quarterback. And Nick Foles is in average to maybe above average pro quarterback. So he's not worth 5 points. And on the other side of the ball, Deshaun Watson was pinballed all over the field on Monday, coming back on Schwartz's defense. Are we even sure he's going to be right for this game?
So I wish I would have taken unders on basically everything that had to do with Deshaun Watson, because that dude is not going to play all season. It's impossible. It is, I would imagine we're looking at a guy that might, maybe play 10 or 11 games this year. He's just going to get absolutely battered all year long.
They can't protect him because he doesn't release the ball quick enough. And yeah, he's going to play 10 to 12 games would be my guess. And look, he could get knocked out of this one early.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not in love with the fact that it doesn't look like AJ Bouye is going to play in this game. I'm certainly not in love with that. However, you do have Jalen Ramsey, who is going to be all up in DeAndre Hopkins stuff all day long in this. And, as long as he's playing and he's going to be on D-Hop, that's going to be an amazing battle up and down the field here. And then, honestly, if you look at this, the Jaguars, I understand they don't have any receivers that really and truly jump off the page to you. They don't have one of these true NFL number one receivers there, but in D.D. Westbrook, in DJ Chark, you do have some guys that can go out there and make plays. We saw Chark be able to, in his second season there for the Jaguars, step in and he had a massive game in week 1 as well. And then listen, I looked at the way that this Texans run defense looks, and yeah, it is certainly a situation where they might just stack the box and say, hey, Gardner Minshew, you're going to have to beat us. We're not going to let Leonard Fournette beat us. And if that's the case, and if that's the case, I almost think that works in the Jaguars' favor, because when you look at how this secondary was able to be shredded by the Saints, and of course the Jags aren't the Saints, but still they were just absolutely shredded by this Saints team. I think that the Jags can at least find enough success to keep this within a touchdown, and we're getting more than a touchdown here. So for me, this was a pretty easy pick and one of the first ones to make the card for me.
Yeah, I love this spot. It's just like, taking advantage of an overreaction or this early in the season. I think you just have to do it. Even if it does, we don't love it with a guy who we don't really know what Gardner Minshew is yet, but you pinch your nose and you just click on the Jaguars here.
So let's talk about one of the ones that made both of our cards, but for the opposite sides. We actually have 2 of those this week to talk through. So I'm very interested here. I actually have Bills -1 at the Giants. You actually have Giants +1 hosting the Bills here. I went through my little spiel first and foremost with this first game. So I'll let you lead off here, and then I'll come back with what I was thinking.
Sure, yeah. Look, nobody looked as bad as the Giants last week. Miami doesn't count. So this is simply buying low on a home dog against a team that probably didn't deserve to win last week in Buffalo. Apparently, Sam Darnold was already playing with mono. So I'm docking the Buffalo defense some points. And the Bills showed no signs of life on offense until C.J. Mosley left the game with an injury. Now, if there is a spot for for them to come to life, it's against this Giants defense. Make no mistake, this unit is terrible, but I still want the home dog here. I don't expect this to be a popular play at all in the contest. That's partly why it landed in my top 5. I think the wrong team is favored here, man. I think the Bills, coming off a win are in a really bad spot. I don't like them as a favorite.
So I liked the Bills here from the get-go, and then the news that just came through here about 45 minutes ago actually only solidified that Sterling Shepard is out this week for the Giants. Really, by far their top number one wide receiver there. So now it's just a hodgepodge there on offense, and I think as we've seen here, this Bills defense is just going to probably say, hey, look, we're kind of like what we were talking about in this first game here. We're not going to let Saquon Barkley beat us. That is not going to happen. So I think they're going to make Eli Manning with his little pop gun arm that he's got and now throwing to not even his, again, we're talking about now a receiving core that really is now led by a tight end, and that's who's going to have to be their number one receiver there. And so I think the Bills defense has enough to keep this putrid Giants offense from actually, I think there's a decent chance they never even lead in this game at all. And also, if you watched, I don't know how much of that Giants game you watched last week, but I watched a pretty good amount of it. And I understand that Josh Allen is not Dak Prescott, and I certainly understand that John Brown probably isn't even Michael Gallup, but the deep ball was there all day long against this Giants defense. And one thing that the Bills and Josh Allen actually excel at in his young career here is throwing the deep ball and is getting those big splash plays. And the Giants gave them up at will against the Cowboys last week. This one actually seemed this was actually another one of the ones that I was on. And not only that, I actually am personally invested as well. But this one will not make the card. We're on opposite sides here, so we will just go ahead and we'll go ahead and scratch it off. I do want to know, though, how do the Giants score here? So is Sterling Shepard out and limited resources here and under center? How do the Giants score?
Yeah, I did see the Shepard news. I guess the hope for the Giants is that they get creative with the two playmakers they have left. Spread Saquon out. They did that at times last year when they were short on receiving options. He's a matchup nightmare wherever he lines up. So find ways to get Saquon in space, and they'll be able to move the ball.
Okay, the other one that we are on opposite sides of here is Vikings Packers. This was one I was actually waiting. I sat up and was refreshing apps to, as soon as I could, get on the money line in this one, try to get on the Vikings side. So when you take a look at this game here, what we're going to see is Xavier Rhodes is going to shadow Davante Adams, and at that point, Aaron Rodgers has to try and win this game with Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Geronimo Allison. We saw, and granted, this Vikings defense is not as strong as the Bears defense. The Bears defense probably still a top 3 or 4 unit, but this Vikings defense is definitely a top 10 unit inside of the NFL this year. And really and truly, when he had to rely on those ancillary receivers and he had to rely on the 2s and 3s because Davante Adams was getting double covered and they were rolling coverage on top of him. They just were basically saying, hey, we're not going to give up this game to Davante Adams. I think that's exactly what we're going to see here from this Vikings team, with this number being 3, because we're getting 3. At worst case, I see a push scenario. I certainly don't see a loss. As I mentioned, I got on the Vikings money line with my own money personally invested in this one as well. You look at Dalvin Cook, who's finally healthy, as explosive as we've ever seen him since he left college. Still 2 very good receivers. Didn't even have to pass that much last week. The defense played so incredibly well there against the Falcons. Kirk Cousins only had to put the ball in the air 10 times. Now, that's not going to be the norm. He's certainly going to have to pass at least double that, if not more, in this game versus the Packers. But defensively, I think they have an advantage. I think they are at least right there with the Packers, if not have a defensive advantage. On the offensive side of the ball, you can try and you can double cover one of the 2 guys, but they have 2 highlight real true 1A, 1B receivers there as well. Didn't even really have to get Kyle Rudolph involved last week because, again, they only threw the ball 10 times in that whole game, but do have a capable tight end as well in Kyle Rudolph, who can make plays as a threat in the red zone. And again, I go back to a healthy Dalvin Cook is very, very huge for this team as well. So that's why I was on the Vikings in this one.
All right. First of all, Xavier Rhodes is the most overrated corner in the league. Devontae Adams is just fine. I mean, he was good in the 2 meetings last year. I think Adams actually hits an edge over Rhodes, so I'm not worried about that matchup. The Packers were my most undervalued team coming into the year this season. I don't think they're getting enough respect for what they did last Thursday night against the Bears. They went into Soldier Field and put on a defensive clinic. I think they're at least a point better than Minnesota on a neutral field. And what you always have to factor in to these Vikings is how awful they are against the spread when they're on the road, especially outdoors. Last week's game was a weird one. They won that game handily because of a blocked punt, early turnovers, and just kind of sat on the ball the rest of the game. That's fresh on people's minds. They beat a Falcons team that came in pretty fringy playoff team, just kind of rolled over them. I think this is a great spot to fade a high stock team in Minnesota on the road. Take a well-rested team with the best quarterback in football.
So you think the Vikings are, because I mean we haven't seen any real movement on this. I mean, I don't know how overvalued they really are. I actually think that people are looking to get on the Packers in this game.
From what I've seen, the majority of tickets are coming in on the Vikings. I think the last I saw was between 62 and 65%.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, look, it's a funny game because we're, again, when we're on opposite sides, we said that the play won't make the card, and so we'll kind of move on. But yeah, it is, to me. I don't know. I have a pretty strong position on this one. It looks like what we're looking at is about 55% of the bets on the Vikings, with about the same amount of money coming in on the Vikings. So it's not one of those scenarios where it looks like the sharps or big betting conglomerates or groups are on the Packers, because we would see a discrepancy there in the money on that side of things. So interesting. All right. I mean, we both made our case here. Nobody wins. I'll start with one of my other two here, and we can see if we can get on the same page on some of our other picks here. One of mine might actually make the card, which was glad that we didn't have opposite sides of this one, is Steelers -4 at home against the Seahawks. Of course, I don't like the Joe Hayden situation, that he's questionable in this one. That being said, this really just goes here as I think both of these coaches are pretty toothless at this point, and I'll take the home team that I think just has more talent, and that's going to be the Steelers in this one. I mean, there's no groundbreaking thing here. I mean, obviously we saw the Steelers go out and get completely hammered by the Patriots. I think that might be pushing down this number a little bit as well. For the contest purposes, it is Steelers -4. In this one right now, we're seeing money has come in on the Steelers. And so we're seeing the Steelers coming in, 3.5 now in this one in different places. So money certainly piling in on the Steelers here. And for me, listen, let's go running back to running back. James Conner and Chris Carson, probably a push. Quarterback to quarterback. I mean, I think Ben Roethlisberger's better. You could make the case to me if you wanted to that it's a push at the quarterback position. Wide receiver position, certainly if Juju is healthy, is going to be in favor of the Steelers there. And then, I mean, what we saw from this Seahawks defense, where Andy Dalton goes in and throws for over 400 yards for the first time in his career on the road, where there's supposedly the 12th man and all, without AJ Green, I might add. It makes me wonder what Ben Roethlisberger at home is going to be able to do against this Seattle secondary. This defense Seattle used to get by on being able to play really strong defense, run the ball, basically play keep away. That's not going to be the option this year. This defense is nowhere near what it has been in the past, and the fact that Pete Carroll is continuing on with his offensive philosophy, despite the fact that they're not keeping, that they're not playing defense as well as they used to, is just a big, big red flag for me. So looks like a bounce back spot for the Steelers at home for me, and I like the Steelers -4.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wrote down. Get right spot for Pittsburgh, coming off that embarrassing throwaway really loss to New England. I think this is a really good defense that will now get unleashed this week against Russell Wilson in this offense. And I don't think Seattle's any good. I don't trust Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll calling plays. I think Pittsburgh's going to shine.
Okay, so we're good. So you'd have been good with that one making the card, even if it wasn't my must make. So that's
that was towards the upper middle of my card.
Good
so
deal.
I'm fine with that getting out.
Good deal. All right, so let's go to one of yours here that is on your list. Falcons +1 versus the Eagles here. Of course, we just mentioned Falcons go up to Minnesota, get their asses handed to them in that game, look completely clueless on offense in that one, could not get anything going whatsoever. The Eagles had to rally against the Redskins, did come through and start to play like a real team there in the, kind of like the end of the first half and certainly through the second half, more of what we are accustomed to with the Eagles and more of what we thought the Eagles were going to be this year. So tell me what you like about the Falcons here against the Eagles.
Yeah, what I said earlier about the Vikings-Packers game about the Falcons there applies here. I don't think I think the Falcons are going to turn things around this week. I think that was kind of a fluky first half that they couldn't get their way out of. This is a pretty good team, and to get them as an underdog here against really anybody aside from the Patriots, I think is a pretty good spot coming off a loss like that where they really want to prove that they are a good team at home. So in prime time, I'm going to trust Matt Ryan against a really porous Philadelphia Eagles secondary. I think Julio and Calvin Ridley are going to eat this week. So I like the Falcons quite a bit.
I
know what that means.
Well, no, I'm actually fairly indifferent on this game. This was actually like a stay away game for me here. It was very. So here's my thing. I was probably higher on the Falcons coming into this season than a lot of people were, but then I was also super high on the Eagles coming into this year. I thought the Eagles were going to be, Super Bowl contenders essentially. And then what we saw, and yeah, I mean, again, they got right in the second half, but I mean, they got right in the second half against the Redskins. It's going to be a bottom 5 team in the NFL throughout the course of this season here. So the fact that it took a half to kind of get clicking versus, I mean, just an atrocious Redskins team here is certainly something that scares me. And it is certainly something that I'm not incredibly happy about by any stretch of the imagination in this one. I guess my only thing here was, I mean, the Falcons looked just absolutely clueless up there in Minnesota. And I understand it's a road game to start the year. And I understand that it's like one of those situations where maybe it's a little bit flat and maybe it's whatever. But what I will say is, since I didn't have an opinion on this game and you do have an opinion on this game, we'll go ahead and have this one make the card here at Falcons +1 versus the Eagles. And, we have 3 picks on our card here. So that's pretty good. Listen, we're making our way across, this is hard. Again, these lines that we're having to use are fixed lines. So, I mean, like, this stuff could be moving all over the place and news could come out and things could happen and whatnot. So just, the lines that we're talking about here aren't necessarily the lines. If you go and, go and Google or go and actually, if you go to the lines and look at our odds tracker over there and what's going on at DraftKings and FanDuel and the various books over in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, you might see completely different stuff because money has certainly come in and things have started to move around. But the way these contests work, Brett, is we got to play the hand that is dealt to us, to use a poker term.
Yeah, what's interesting with the Circa lines that you pointed out yesterday is it looks like they're going with what they think the line might close at, because we've seen lines at Circa that we can't find anywhere. We saw some of them last week. There was the Colts +6. I didn't see it anywhere when Circa released that line. So it
was 6.5 pretty much everywhere at that.
That was Circa was the only 6 I saw, and I don't even think Circa had 6 at that time. So that was just a line they set for the contest alone. So definitely something to keep in mind as we're going through this, because might be able to find some value spots. Yeah,
and one of the weirdest things was, as we were kind of comparing the lines, like a lot of the lines that are in the contest are not even the lines that are at Circa. They're like actually pretty off from the lines that are currently at Circa. And so that's a pretty interesting deal here. We were talking about it was Bills -1 that's on the card here. It sits at 2 at Circa, and that hasn't moved since these lines came out here. And so
I haven't seen Bills -1 anywhere. So
it's pretty interesting to see. Here. So all right, so let's talk about the final one that was on my card here. And that is the Cowboys -5 at the Redskins. Now, there's a couple of things that went into play here. One of which was this thing opened at 7. For whatever reason, immediately gets bet down. Now it's back up. It gets bet down to 5.5 at most places. Now it's back up to 6 at several other books. Definitely up to 5.5 at every book out there. I feel like we're getting a little bit of value here anyway on this. And then it comes out Darius Geis has surgery on his knee. He's been moved to IR. Jordan Reed going to miss again for the Washington Redskins here. And so you've got a couple of very key components out. They're going to go with a million-year-old Adrian Peterson at running back here. And honest to God, this Dallas defense is actually for real. And I understand it's a road spot here, and I understand that this Washington team could, quote unquote, try and rally or whatever it might be. But I think they blew their wad last week, and when they were not able to hold that lead that they had against the Eagles, I think that there's certainly something that goes on there that kind of is a pretty telling sign of what this Washington Redskin team is. I think this Dallas team is actually really, really, really for real on pretty much every facet of the game. We saw Zeke come back and get basically a full workload. They didn't really need him much more than they used him. And Gallup, it looks like he has a pretty good connection with Dak, and that is really good for them because they also have Amari Cooper out there as well. Old man Jason Witten, even though I think, Brett, you could outrun him in a 40, is still finding ways to get open. I mean, he is just really good at finding holes and sitting down. And yeah, it's only going to be a 7-yard gain, but you move the ball 7 yards at a time and it can work. And so I just really think this Dallas team is a very complete team top to bottom. And I think that this Redskins team, on top of what we thought was going to be a horrible team anyway, now they're down even more key components here. And I think that this actually has a chance to get ugly in the Cowboys' favor.
It definitely does. But this was one of the toughest for me to cap because what I saw last week in Dallas was a legit Super Bowl contender, like you said. So I saw -5 and initially thought, all right, there might be some value on that number. But this line also might be inflated because the game was in front of a national audience. So I tend to lean the home dog in these NFC East matchups. I just, given what that Dallas team looked so good, it's hard for me to take Washington here too. I was completely indifferent on this one. I threw it at the bottom and I don't know. Convince me, I guess.
Well, I tried to.
We might be able to find something else.
I tried to with that whole spiel there at the beginning. Listen, let's talk through this and we'll see if there's anything else, some other spots here that maybe look a little bit more intriguing to us and maybe something that we would want to jump on. The final one that's on your card here, and I knew this one was going to be on your card regardless. I was 100% positive. You're going +18 on the Miami Dolphins against the New England Patriots. Now, this is the one. Convince me.
Listen, okay, let's start from the beginning. Back in May, when the Vegas books opened this, it was Patriots -10. Seemed pretty fair. Defending champs on the road against one of the worst rosters in football with a rookie coach. Last week, FanDuel opens it at Patriots -9.5. Not a whole lot has changed. Now, we've got a week of information, and okay, those lines were wrong. We know that. The 9.5, 10, that was wrong. I think the books clearly misjudged just how bad this Miami team is. But this line we're looking at right now is more wrong. People are losing their minds with this. 18 points on the road should not exist in the NFL, especially with a team in the Patriots that has struggled so much going down to Miami and playing there. They're facing a coach in Brian Flores, who has been inside that Patriots locker room. He knows that organization as well as anybody. And he knows what's in store for him this week. And I don't think Belichick has any motivation to stomp on his former assistant either. Hell, Matt Patricia beat the Patriots in Detroit last year, and the Patriots were the Lions were a horror show. So I don't care how bad Miami looked on Sunday. They're not just going to roll over here in week 2 against a division rival. I think there are good football players on this team. I love Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks to bet on because he goes. It doesn't matter. He's going to go for it, and he's that backdoor guy. And 18 points is a lot of points with Ryan Fitzpatrick, man.
Yeah, and I'm fine with this. I'm actually fine with this one making the card strictly for the fact that at the end of the day, it's still a professional team. Now, we're going to feel really stupid when this is on our card and we're sitting there and the Patriots are up 42-0, and we're going to say, yeah, that was probably what was going to happen in this game. But it is, I think if you just take everything at face value here, it is still a professional football team with pro football players. And even if some of these guys are asking to be traded or want to be traded or whatever it might be, there's still pride involved there. And maybe you want to show out for other teams who might want to trade for you or
right.
or whatever it might be. And at the end of the day, if you're the Patriots, is there any incentive to completely keep your foot on the gas whenever you kind of look at how this Patriots schedule is shaping up, right? I mean, like, there's no reason for them to really sweat. And I mean, I'm being honest here, like, really sweat the next month and a half of their season. You know, I mean, like, it's kind of like, hey, let's go out there and just get the wins and move on and be healthy and make sure that we're where we want to be. I mean, this goes, we talked about this if you listen to any of our preview podcasts, but I mean, for this Patriots team, it goes Dolphins, Jets, Bills, Redskins, Giants over the next 5 weeks. You know, I mean, that is literally the next month and a half of their schedule. And then it comes back on October the 21st with the Jets again. Now that is at the Jets at least, but still, I mean, so we're talking about the next 6 weeks of this schedule that are almost a cakewalk. So it would not surprise me to see Bill Belichick go out there and they might be hammering the hell out of these guys through 3.5 quarters. I mean, we might be looking at this thinking we're dead because they might actually be up by 35. I mean, that could be a real situation, but is there any real, and listen, I know Tom Brady kind of runs that team and he hates to come off the field. Like, he is a dude who's like, no, I'm staying on the field. You're not pulling me out. But is there any real reason to keep your starters out there, risk their health, risk whatever, when honestly, you can cakewalk through the rest of these weeks?
Even if he is out there in the fourth quarter, this is Rex Burkhead and Damian Harris running straight every single play in the fourth quarter. We've seen it countless times. They just drain the clock and get out of that stadium healthy and move on to next week. That's all it's going to be. So I love this spot. Even if we're down in the fourth by 20 some points, we've got Ryan Fitzpatrick, who is going to try and score as much as possible in that fourth quarter. So I love it.
All right, so we have 4 on our card here. Let's run.
That's it? We haven't got to 5 yet?
We have 4 on our card here. Let's run through these other games and see if anything kind of jumps out at us. And I'll just list it off for the listeners so they know what these lines were set at as the time that this contest was posted. So we have the Titans as 3-point favorites at home against the Colts. We have the Lions as 2-point dogs at home against the Chargers. We have the Ravens as 13-point favorites at home against the Cardinals. We have let's see what game we've not. Oh, we have the Bengals as 1.5-point favorites at home against the 49ers. We have the Raiders as 6.5-point dogs at home against the Chiefs. We have the Rams 2.5-point favorites at home against the Saints. Broncos 2.5-point dogs at home against the Bears. That game is never making our card. I'm not betting on the Bears or Broncos for any stretch of the imagination. Not happening.
You don't like that Fangio revenge?
And then we have the Monday night game that pretty much got all the value sucked out of it. It is the Jets are 6.5-point dogs at home against the Browns, and I think we would just feel stupid betting that one, considering it moved a full 4.5 points, depending on where you were looking after the Sam Darnold news there. So, what was a game that barely didn't make your card, and then I can give you the game that barely didn't make mine.
All right, I like the Colts. I'll start with what I don't like about the Colts is starting the year with back-to-back road games. I think that does play a factor, and I wonder if that might be baked into the line, but I'm still super high on this Colts team. And I said last week, I think the Titans are average. That was good enough to stomp the fraud Browns, but I truly believe the Colts are a better football team. And coming off that tough road loss, facing a stock high opponent, I think we're getting some value on Indy at +3.
The one that barely didn't make the card for me was Cardinals +13 at the Ravens. And reason being is we're not going to see Lamar Jackson throw 5 touchdowns on 20 passes ever again, maybe in the history of his career. I mean, it's just not going to happen. This Ravens team wants to be run first, and he didn't even have to run in that game. Mark Ingram had a pretty good game, but still not on a ton of opportunities and everything there. And I think at the core, what this Ravens team wants to be is kind of a power team first, use a lot of the run, use Lamar Jackson with his legs, and use that big stable of backs that they have there. I mean, they've got 3 different guys that they will probably use there for the Ravens, which what that does is if there's fewer opportunities it's just fewer opportunities for the Ravens to get up just massively, right? I mean, they play possession ball, and the Cardinals 13. I really wish this was 14. If this was 14, I think it would have been a slam dunk play for me. But I guess my biggest feeling here is this just seems like it reeks of backdoor cover all day long. Like the Ravens get up 3 touchdowns, and then we kind of see what we saw from the Cardinals last week, where Kyler Murray goes into pass only mode. He ended up passing the ball 50 times, over 50 times last week. And they come back and get some sort of backdoor cover for us there in this one. That was kind of my thinking in that Cardinals-Ravens game.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I had the Cardinals right below the Colts. The look ahead on this was 9.5. I think this might be a couple points off where it should be. So I'm perfectly happy with going Cardinals. Where were you on the Colts?
So my problem with the Colts mainly in this one, and I know it's not a huge thing, but so I mean we should have mentioned Devin Funchess out for he placed on IR. It is designation to return, but you lose that number 2 guy there, and now you're having to go into the well here. And they do have some talent. They have Deion Kane, they have Paris Campbell, but these aren't guys that have really contributed to this offense at all. I mean, really have not contributed in the least bit. And so if it becomes kind of like the Marlon Mack show there, I think that the Titans, as much as I hate the Titans, and I do feel like eventually the wheels will fall off here for the Titans, I think if it becomes the Marlon Mack show, that this Titans team is going to be able to, at home, kind of control this game, control whatever, and not allow Jacoby Brissett to go crazy to T.Y. Hilton. That was kind of my thinking there in that one. And then it did play into and it did, as you just mentioned, the whole back-to-back road game thing to begin the season certainly did have a factor as well.
Yeah, agree with everything you just said. So, let's go Cardinals.
If we want to go Cardinals, let's go Cardinals. I think the only other one that might make sense would be the Bengals at home against the 49ers, but do we really want to put the Bengals on our card? It's kind of like my only
favorite. A favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thing.
I didn't know what to do with that one.
Yeah, that was my only thing. It's like, the Bengals, I get it. I mean, the 49ers certainly looked like complete garbage as well in week 1. And it would be the whole back-to-back road game thing for them. But the 49ers did not go back to California. They stayed on this side of the country. They went up to Youngstown, Ohio, and just stayed over here, practiced all week in Ohio. So it wasn't one of those, hey, fly 5 hours and then fly 5 hours back across the country type situation. They just stayed over here. And it's the beginning of the season. I've always kind of been more on this travel thing as the season moves on, when you really love sleeping in your own bed because you're kind of nicked up and it's just better to go home and you have your own routine. And you probably have, these guys are so rich, they probably have their own, cryo chambers at home and all kinds of crazy stuff and ice bath things and, high altitude, you know what I'm saying? Like they just have all these recovery things and all that. And instead they're living out of a hotel room and making these long plane trips. To me, I've always factored it in much, much more when it's one of those situations, kind of like more mid to late season.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I kind of lean Niners here, but I think I'm lower on the Bengals than most everybody. But this was way at the bottom of my card. I had no interest in this one. So
awesome.
Yeah, let's
All right,
go Cardinals.
Let's do it. Cardinals at plus 13 versus that's at the Ravens. Okay, so the final card for week 2 is going to be Jags plus 8 at the Texans, Steelers minus 4 at home versus the Seahawks, Falcons plus 1 at home versus the Eagles, Dolphins plus 18 versus the Pats at home, and Cardinals on the road plus 13 at the Ravens here. I feel pretty good about this card. The only one that doesn't sit incredibly well with me in the pit of my stomach is Falcons and Eagles, just because I have I have to let my preseason biases go, though. That's the other thing that we talk about, not overreacting, but then at the same time, you also can't let your preseason biases come into play here. Just because I thought this Eagles team was going to be a team that was going to be one of the very high Super Bowl contenders here doesn't mean that that's actually the case. I mean, that's just was one man's opinion. That was just my opinion, and I have to be able to come watch what I see throughout the season, take into account all the statistics, all the different things like that. And, if it warrants it, get off of some of these preseason biases,
Yeah, I'm with you. I really liked the Eagles coming into the year too, but this is one of the games I had circled. Falcons are one of those pass-heavy teams that can really exploit the biggest weakness in that Eagles team. That's the secondary, so that's why I'm pretty high on the Falcons.
All right, guys. Appreciate you listening to our process and our thoughts here. Brett is just so everybody knows, Brett is dead wrong on the Vikings and Packers. So go out and bet the Packers. Go out and bet the Vikings in that game. Take the 3 points. You will thank me later. And no, I'm just kidding. We'll see how that one certainly plays out. And very interested to see this Bills and Giants game. With the top pass catcher out for the Giants there, I think that the Bills defense now just has a really big edge over that offense and the pop gun arm of Eli Manning. So going to be pretty interesting week in the NFL here. And, Brett, look, with the quarterly prizes in the Circa contest here, guys, the final numbers came out, and it's going to be $143,000 for every quarterly prize. And so we are really we're being realistic here. To beat out 1,800 teams for the top $1 million prize was never really the goal here. The goal was to continue to gather information, to try and become more sharp as the season moved on, and maybe snipe one of these quarterly prizes. And the fact that it moved from 50,000 up to 143,000, pretty interesting to me, pretty fun to me. And I certainly think, after we get through these first few weeks, we'll be able to really get a feel for who these teams are and really, I think, kind of hone in. And I hope we can make a run at one of these quarterly things.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're already drawn dead for the first quarterly, right?
Most likely. Most likely. A 1-3-1 is certainly not. Yeah. 1-3-1 certainly not where we want to be starting with any of these. But again, quarterly prizes certainly make this contest really, really interesting. And again, I think we're certainly going to get better as the season moves on here. I think this is something that we evaluate, I think, pretty well. And look, there's a lot of guessing that goes into the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and look, if you're in the Circa contest and you're listening to this podcast, don't forget we have a dedicated Circa Sports Million page at TheLines.com weekly. We post the weekly lines. We've got all the payouts there. We post this podcast there. Everything you need to know about the Circa Sports Million. If you can find all that stuff on the Circa homepage as well. But we've got it all on one page. Might be easier to kind of consume all of it in one place. So definitely check that out. It's right on the Lines homepage. And
be sure and follow us on Twitter at TheLinesUS, at PlayPicksUS. And, if you're in the contest, let us know your picks. Or even if you're not in the contest, let us know what your picks would be. I'm very interested to see that and see if any of our plays are way off. Be sure and let us know. We'll be back next week. For Brett, I'm Matt. Good luck this week in week 2.